philosopher.
What's up? Another episode of the Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Rendes, also known as Ricky Vance, and a great episode for you today. Today we have Lindsey Scharmyn. She's the host of the Rogue Ways podcast. I recently was a guest on her show. We had a super fun discussion. And then I invited her on my show and explored her ideas and philosophies and spiritual awakening and all that stuff. So definitely check out the Rogue Ways podcast, and it's available anywhere you can get podcasts, including Rockfin. And this leads me into the next topic in this intro, and that's my YouTube channel has permanently been deleted. So I woke up this morning and found out my YouTube channel is completely gone. They've erased everything. I even had a YouTube TV account that they won't let me access. I might consider making another YouTube channel just to post clips to see if I can go under the radar and maybe not get deleted. But that's going to take a lot of time, and I don't know if I have the time to do that. It's really hard to balance everything at the moment. This show's been recorded for about a week, and it's been hard to get it out because I've been booking the Union of Unwanted shows, and which Lindsey has been a guest on before, and just with work and the kids and soccer and basketball and so many different things going on, it's so hard to find the time to release this. This is why I keep telling you guys I hate talking about financial donations or helping the show financially in any way, but if eventually we can get enough people donating, I can do this full time, and then the shows would be more consistent. The shows would be hopefully better because I could focus on them instead of having all these outside influences and stresses that affect the way I perform on the show and affect my ability to research or prepare for the show. But if you can support the show, this is a value for value show. Support the show any way you can. If you can support the show financially, there's plenty of ways of doing it. If you go on my website, rippleeffectpodcast.com or rickyvrance.com, you'll find a support tab where you can find a PayPal account, Patreon, crypto, a link to my merch store. So plenty of ways to support the show financially if you can donate and you're in a good financial spot to do so. If you can't support the show financially, just spread the word. Tell people about the show, share the show, post it on your YouTube channel if you want. All those little gestures go a long way and they help. So thank you everybody who does do that. So now with my YouTube channel gone, definitely go to my website and see all the places you can find my video episodes. Rockfin, Odyssey, BitChute, Float, Rumble. All these links will also be in the show description so you can find them there. And I think the last thing is I did an amazing interview with False Reality Check podcast. They are just two amazing, fun people. And sometimes you do shows where for some reason you're in the right state of mind with the right hosts or guests and the right chemistry, and you talk about the right topics, and I think it makes for a gem of a show. It ends up being just one of those really special conversations that you're so excited about archiving and sharing with the world. And this is truly one of those interviews where I was on their show, and after the show, I'm like, wow, what an amazing conversation, because we connected on so many different levels and on so many different topics. So definitely check out False Reality Check. Hopefully by the time you hear this, soon after, you'll be able to get the episode on their RSS feed. But if you follow me on Instagram, Facebook, anywhere, I'm still available. Twitter, I'll share the link once it's available. I'll share the interview. So definitely check out their podcast. They've also been on the Union of the Unwanted, and that's the beautiful thing of the Union of the Unwanted. I don't have a whole lot of pull in regards to like being a celebrity, or I don't have a lot of finances or resources in regards to that. But one thing I do have is I've networked well with people. I've been nice to a lot of people, and people are always willing to help and connect with me and friends of mine. So to be able to use that talent and those skills and those resources to create the Union of the Unwanted, which now has become a way of helping expose people to smaller shows, up and coming shows, to be able to have the opportunity to help out shows like Truthzilla, Deborah Gets Red Pilled, False Reality Check, by just inviting them on the You've Unwanted and helping them network and helping them get exposed to a new audience. It's amazing. I'm so glad that that show exists. I can't thank the other three guys I co-host with for being on board and being a part of this journey. And I truly feel like some of the discussions we've had on the You've Unwanted are some of the most important shows on the internet. Honestly, I mean, the show we did with Dr. Robert Malone was absolutely amazing. The show that we did on near-death experiences was amazing. The most recent one we did on spirituality was amazing. We've had so many amazing shows with amazing guests on that podcast. I can't thank those guys enough, and thank everybody who's supporting the Union of the Unwanted community. You can go to theunionoftheunwanted.com to find links to all the channels and all the places you can find Union of the Unwanted stuff. That's getting hard to repeat over and over again, the Union of the Unwanted stuff. So the unionoftheunwanted.com, you can get merch. You can find links to our Odyssey channel, Rockfin channel, all that stuff. We live stream it every other Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern time. And I believe that's it. Enjoy the conversation. I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace. So how are you?
I'm good. How are you? It's been a busy day.
I know I wish we could do this full time, or at least I could do it full time. I don't know what you do full time. You might like your job, but it always seems to get in the way of the things I actually want to do. And it's like you do all this running around, then you sit down, you hit record, and you pretend you don't have all these other things happening in the background, and it makes it harder to kind of capture a focused, on point conversation, because sometimes you're just not focused.
Yeah. Or like days where I feel sick or whatever. But I'm actually really lucky because I quit my job 3 years ago and I don't work full time anymore. And I've had some sort of ventures back. I was a teacher for 14 years. And so I've like done some tutoring and some things like that on and off since then to sort of supplement. But I got rid of my car, so I have no car payment. I got rid of my house, so I have no house payment. I found ridiculously cheap rent that doesn't even make sense. And so I have to make very little in order to survive now. And I had like all my stuff. I had my nest egg still. So I have like backups and I can always go back to teaching. But in the meantime, I'm trying to just do this, and I'm trying to get my business side of things going more and more, so I don't ever have to teach again. I love teaching. I just don't want to do it for the government.
Yeah, no, I hear you, especially now with like homeschooling becoming much more popular. And I think people are becoming much more aware of the brainwashing that happens in school. And I
God, I
remember
hope
some
so.
years ago, I had Carrie McDonald on. She wrote the book Unschooled, I believe. And
Cool.
I didn't even know what unschooling was at the time, but it once you kind of get into it, it makes perfect sense. It's like your kids come home and then you unschool them, right? You're like, okay, what did they teach you? Okay, let's correct some things. Let's go over some of these things, and just in hopes to kind of push back against any brainwashing that might happen. And I know some people are like, well, it's not really brainwashing. It's like, it kind of is. I mean,
it's indoctrination.
It is. Yeah. And you really don't teach kids how to think. You teach them what to think. And kids come home basically adopting these ideas that they're told, and with not asking a whole lot of questions. And they assume because the teacher is the authority, whatever information they get from the teacher must be correct. So that is adopted into their life worldview and life view. And just, it's slowly kind of molding their view of reality. And that's such a big responsibility. And parents have to be involved. They have to ask those questions. They have to be like, okay, what did you learn? And if there's anything that you think is incorrect, or maybe they should see other perspectives, that's kind of your chance. Because to just give your kids a way to the school system and just assume, like, I mean, it's hard to complain after, right? Like, you get your kid and you're like, oh, my kids are things like this, or my kid. It's like, well, maybe it was your fault for not really getting involved, or not asking questions, or not having these long form conversations. I mean, what I do with this on this podcast is what I do with my kids. I mean, I have long form conversations as long as you can with the toddler. And
yeah.
And I attempt to kind of just figure out, like, okay, how do you look at the world? What do you think? Why do you think that? And kind of pick at their brain. But before I go on long rants, you did touch on it's funny because we're literally just talking about you, and me, Sam, Charlie and Midnight Mike because we're just kind of brainstorming Monday's Union of the Unwanted episode, and we're like, oh, what should we do? What should we do? You know, and we're kind of trying to gather some ideas. And spirituality was a topic that we haven't hit yet. That Sam was kind of brainstorming, and then they're like, oh, who would we get? And your name came up first. So
that'd be cool.
Yeah. So just but you know, if possible, then maybe mark it off on your calendar. If Monday you're free.
I think it would work actually.
But for people who are listening, because spirituality is one of those topics you get into, but you get into a lot of different topics. I mean, you really are into so many different things, which I think is what makes you so fascinating and really makes for fascinating conversations. For people listening, you know, we slightly hit on the topic of teaching and some of that career. Do you mind giving people like a brief, like, or it doesn't have to be brief. I mean, we have plenty of time. If a origin story of, you know, basically how you got to where you are now?
Oh, wow. It's so, there's so much. This is part of why Rogue Ways, my show, and Middle Path, my other show, have so much elasticity, and, you know, that I dive into so many different topics because my life has taken me in a million places. And, you know, the teaching was one thing, and that was the prime thrust for most of my life. Like from a very young age, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. But even that was born out of a spiritual understanding, you know, the more I look back and the more I understand those sorts of things. So really my whole life was undergirded by this spiritual understanding, which ties in intimately to, you know, if we're going to talk about communism today, how that all went for me. But so I've had these few kind of, you know, primary tracks, and one was spirituality that I think undergirds it all. One was becoming a teacher and an educator and, you know, a thinker in that regard too, because I didn't just pick a topic and study that and then realize it didn't really end up as a job and then go, which is what most people do, and then go, oh, I guess I'll teach. I actually started from, okay, I'm going to teach. I want to be a good teacher. How am I going to go about doing that? And the training I laid out for myself to get to teaching actually involved a much deeper education than I think a lot of people tend to get. And for various reasons, some of them accidental and some of them intentional. So a lot of that was very much focused on metacognition and philosophy. And I think those things then also led into sort of my grand unifying field that has become what I do now, which again, I just am fascinated by and touch on everything in my show and in my work that I do. I write, I'm an author. I've always been a writer as well. And so I have books and I have articles that I write on my site, rogueways.org. And so yeah, it's just like it's a mishmash, you know, but it's funny because the more I go, the more I see how much every single piece reinforces all the other pieces and ties together in really exceptionally beautiful ways. Sometimes I'm like, oh, wow, I was like perfectly prepared for this. In fact, when I started Rogue Ways, people are like, why are you just so automatically good at this? And I was like, well, first of all, thank you. And second, it's exactly like teaching a class. You know, I have to be sort of like have like a personality. I have to have an idea of structure. I have to know where I'm going and where I want people to end up in their thoughts and their thinking. And then how do we get there? And I want to, you know, honor people where they're at and invite them to ask questions and think. And it's just all these really similar skills, you know, which accidentally just like turned out that way. So I guess that's a rambling, sort of concise, short answer of what's going on with me.
Well, that kind of makes sense because James Corbett, who is also a teacher, you know, he's one of those guys that we consider like the gold standard because he's so good at getting his ideas across. He's very good at just speaking while recording. And I know that sounds like simple, but it's not. Like, you know, when people start shows, podcasts or YouTube channels or whatever, I think a lot of times we attempt to like just capture the way we speak with our friends or the way we have conversations with our buddies when we're in a comfortable setting. And then you hit record, and as much as you want to tell yourself, like, don't let it matter. Don't think about it. It still affects the way you speak and what you're willing to share with. I'm an open book, but sometimes it affects what I'm willing to share in regards to like, okay, do I have this fact right? Maybe I'm not going to talk about this because I don't want to sound like an idiot because I think I'm wrong. I could be right. I don't know. You know, so you have all these like internal dilemmas and these internal debates on like, should I talk about this or you know, and when you're in that flow state, you know, it's almost like an athlete. You're in that flow state where you're just like, you're engaged in the conversation with somebody. You're not even thinking about all those other things. You're just free. Like, that's the best. Like, that's when you're like, wow, this podcast is magic. And so many times when I have shows where I'm like, oh, I enjoyed myself, I think the guests enjoyed themselves. So even though it wasn't like maybe the most information, or it wasn't maybe the craziest story, but because I enjoyed myself, I have a feeling other people are going to enjoy listening to it. And it usually ends up being true. It's almost like if the people participating in the conversation are enjoying themselves, then the listeners do too. So, but that's hard to do. That is really hard to do. Do you? Well, you also talked about writing. How long have you been writing? Was that before teaching, after teaching, or when did you?
It was before teaching. Yeah, I started writing actually as a therapy when my father died when I was 11, and my counselor in school, I don't know if everyone had this experience or not, but our school counselors for a while actually were counselors, where you would go for emotional support. Now they just schedule you and like arrange your future for you, but back then you actually had them for emotional support. And so I would go to the counselors at school, and it was very clearly beyond their training to deal with that level of trauma and loss. And so I think they were just kind of grasping, and they told me, well, you have a lot that you need to get out and process and deal with. And there's not always going to be somebody who can sort of help you step by step and listen to everything. So start writing, keep this journal, and I was kind of like, well, what? Like, what did that even? And I had already been a really good at English and a really avid high level reader. So I had like the writing skill sort of embedded already, but I didn't understand journaling. And she was like, just write as if you're writing to someone, but also no one's ever going to read it. It's private. You can say whatever you want. Don't worry about grammar, about spelling, about anything like that. And just like let anything out you want. You don't even have to ever go back and read it. I was like, oh, that's actually really freeing. Like I can just write anything. I can get into the depth of my like secret thoughts and emotions and all of this. And so I started journaling every day, and I would just fill up pages day after day after day after day. And this really, I think, was my earliest training in getting into exactly what you're talking about, that sort of flow state where you're just allowing things to just come through, and not questioning it and not judging it. And that's actually the most creative state I think we can be in. And I think we overthink usually, and we put all of these, parameters on it and these expectations and these goals that actually kills it. And if we can get in that state. So this was some of the best training I think I had as a writer. So I started writing then, but I mostly did poetry and nonfiction because those make the most sense to my brain somehow, even though they seem very different. And it took me a while, but eventually I started writing fiction novels. And so I have 2 now out of a trilogy. It's the Sine Curve of Eons trilogy. And the third one is under construction as we speak. And that came out while I was teaching. I started writing those. And so, once you teach long enough, you can get into some grooves and actually can have some private time for yourself. And that happened luckily. And so I was able to write these books over the course of a few years. And those were my first forays into fiction. I had never done it before. And it just kind of all came out, I think, exactly because of that sort of flow state practice that I had before, because I honestly couldn't have told you how to write fiction before that. But like everything, I had read a million fiction books. I had thought about fiction my whole life. So I had an intrinsic understanding. And I've had students ask me before, like, how do I become a better writer? Or even students of foreign languages ask me when I've been teaching abroad, how do I become a better speaker? And it's the same answer over and over again. And it's just to read, keep reading, read more and more and more, because your mind is absorbing the patterns and the structures just intrinsically. You don't have to know what they're called or why they're that way, or, that's also cool. And you can also learn that, and it's valuable, but you can also absorb it in this way. And so I had that going for me, plus the flow state sort of mindset, and yeah, some books popped out. So, I was before, and I was during, and I still am after teaching.
Yeah, well, I think there is. So I used to play music in a band, and I still play music from time to time, but podcasting has taken up much more of my life. But there's something that I miss about being creative, and especially writing, because I did the same thing. I would take my poetry and then kind of just modify it to use it for my band's lyrics for the songs, to write the songs themselves. And there was something about, and initially I was very self-conscious about, like, somebody's going to possibly read this, somebody's going to possibly hear this, and they're the most interpersonal thoughts and exploring my deepest maybe traumas or whatever it may be. And that makes you hesitant to share those things. And then I'm like, well, you know what? Like, to put out the best thing, the best poetry or song, it has to be personal. And I have to be able to kind of write like nobody's going to read it. So that's kind of what I did. And it's amazing the benefits of writing, not just getting it out, but the exploring of ideas. It's similar to like long form conversations. I feel like the benefits are very similar because you're exploring your own ideas and your own feelings, your own thoughts. You're also rearranging them and you're figuring them out in the process. So when you're writing about like how you feel about something, sometimes you realize like the way you thought you felt about it is actually different than the way you actually feel about it. Or you realize like, I haven't really thought this out at all, and I'm figuring it all out while I write. So there's so, and I've had, you know, authors on, I've had musicians on, anybody who writes, comedians, like they all say the same thing. Like there's a huge benefit in just writing how you feel and your thoughts and anything that's going on in your brain and putting it out. I mean, there's even a exercise of trying to avoid conflict via text message, like they say, or email, like you write it out but you never send it, you just delete it. And just the exercise of writing it out and that whole process will actually make you feel better, even though you didn't send it, because you feel like you're at least getting it off your chest. It's some type of, you know, alternative to actually verbally getting it off your chest. You're getting off your chest by writing it. And so yeah, there's all those things that I think are super beneficial as people, just to help figure out how you feel about things and who you are and what could be causing anger or happiness or whatever, just sorting that all out, that internal self-reflecting. But something else that was really interesting that you said was the pattern recognition while reading. With music, it's the same thing, and sports also too. Like I play basketball and I play soccer, but basketball has been like my primary sport. And I never played in high school, but I played in leagues when I got older. And it was I learned from just watching. You know, it was all just pattern recognition, like watching patterns, you know, over and over again on TV, watching people play, watching you know, people explain like what happened, and then looking for that pattern, and then little by little, it's almost like you're downloading, you know, that information, even if you subconsciously don't even realize it. And it's the same thing with music. Like I would listen to music all the time, over and over again, and I never I was never taught music, but I would listen to, why do I like this part, you know, or what's going on in this part of the song, this build up or this breakdown or whatever, that just catches my attention and really makes it pleasant to listen to. And you would pick up on those things, like, okay, they're doing this, or it's this you know, you look for that recurring theme, you know, it's like, oh, this is what's going on and this is why. So that's the thing I like, that's the thing I want to recreate. So there's, yeah, like you said, there's so much going on in your brain, like subconsciously, that you're not even aware of sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and this is why, you know, when you were saying that you talk to your kids in this unschooling idea, or even if you're not thinking of it as unschooling, you're just asking them, you're conversing with them, you're asking them to share with you and explain to you, describe to you, maybe even offer evidence to you for various things, you know, and just the act of discussing is actually building their skills of understanding, of analysis, and of communication. And this is another thing that I think people wildly underestimate. You know, this is why they say to us that from a very infancy, we should be talking to babies, we should be mirroring back to them the different facial features and all these things, because all of us, all of the time, are learning, and we're always absorbing what's going on, and we're always doing pattern recognition, unless we're in some, like, I don't know, some really distracted states, maybe we're not, right? Or some really traumatized or emotional states. But otherwise, that's our natural state, is to absorb and reflect and whatever. And so when we're asking people to share with us and talk with us, we're also helping ourselves and them learn. Anytime you're writing anything or reading anything, all of this is actually, so this is part of what I talk to people. I do some educational consulting still with people. And so they ask me, you know, about homeschooling and how do we do it? It's going to be so hard and we're going to like struggle with it and all this. And I'm like, it's so much easier than you think. First of all, when you go to if you could go to a school and be a fly on the wall when they don't know you're observing, and you could just count the number of minutes that your child is actually engaged in learning or learning activities during a day, it's nowhere near 7 hours. It's maybe going to be about 3, right? If you're lucky, if that's a great day for them. That's about 3 hours of learning a day. So first of all, just like cut the amount of time you think you're supposed to spend on direct, active, new learning of new skills and engaged activity based on those skills a day. Just cut that in half, or maybe even a third of whatever you thought was going to happen. They don't need more than that either, and that's just true. And then also, really wildly, people overestimate what is happening in schools. They think it's this really high level stuff. Most teachers aren't very high level, most curriculum isn't very high level, and most of the activities they're doing isn't that high level. So if you're just inviting them to do any amount of learning and engagement of substance with any topic at all for a couple hours a day, they're probably getting as much or more than they would get from school, especially because it's like one-on-one or probably at the most small group instruction, which is proven over and over again to be more functional, for their receptivity and acquisition and retention of those things. So like, it's way easier than people think. I'm not saying it's completely easy or that you're never going to have to like find some math curriculum that works or whatever, but those things are surmountable.
So what made you want to teach? Like, was it, do you like kids, or what? I mean, what age were you interested in teaching? And
yeah, I basically I like I said, it came from a spiritual place, which at the time I wouldn't have necessarily understood it as such, but I looked out at the world and understood I would have to get a job, probably have to go to college to get it. And I wanted to do that, but I also looked around and saw that most things in the world really sucked and harmed people or the planet or, our communities or whatever, and that most things were destructive and I couldn't be a part of it. And there just wasn't much left. So I could, as far as I could tell, be a nurse or a teacher, or something that no one would pay me for. So if I wanted to survive and have money and like a car and a house, I would have to do something like that. Part of me was like maybe a vet or like a, marine biologist. But then I was like, I can't be a nurse or a vet because I can't deal with bodily fluids and poop. And like, I'm just not that person. Maybe I'm weak. And then marine biologists, everybody wants to be a marine biologist. There's tons of marine biologists out there with no job. So that wasn't probably going to work out either. And, we always need teachers. So maybe I'll be a teacher. And then there was a pretty critical moment in high school. My math teacher, his wife died and he was gone, and he wasn't the best teacher, but we knew for sure that we would still have whatever test on whatever day, because he was one of those teachers who was like, on this day, we're doing this page with these numbers. This day, we're doing this. Every single day was mapped out ahead of time, and he never, ever slowed down, skipped, or anything. And so we're like, when he comes back and that test is there, that test is there. Whether this substitute is going to teach us or not, we're going to have been expected to learn all this. So we were like scrambling and struggling. And I just frequently found myself at the front of the classroom showing people how to do things because I was good at math, and it just happened that way. And so one of those times I was up there writing and like talking, and I turned around and everybody was quiet and taking notes. And I was like, I could do this. Like, this is pretty good, actually. So that was part of it too. And then the more I went into teaching education and pursuing that as a career in college, the more I really cemented, how horrible our teaching system is, our education system is, that it wasn't just me growing up in our school system, that it was all school systems, that it was systemic, and that teacher preparation programs usually were really exceptionally poorly done, and the people going into them were exceptionally unfit, and often the product when they came out the other side was sort of like, this person probably shouldn't have made it, but we need teachers, so we'll just push them through. And there's just so many issues. And so then it became like a crusade of, I'm going to do my best to try and get in as deep as I can and maybe even change some things. And of course that didn't happen, but that was the goal. And I also from an early age saw just, again, I thought it was more localized, and it took me a while to see how systemic it was, but just how bad a bad teacher can be, and just how much of someone's life it could affect if a teacher was really poor, and also how good it could be if a teacher was genuinely caring, genuinely loved their subject, genuinely understood how to teach well or even decently, and treated kids with respect, and how much good that could do for their lives. So, I really felt like I could go in, I could be a good teacher, I could maybe change the system or help the system be better, and then I could work with maybe especially disadvantaged students, and help them have a better educational experience than they would have maybe without me. And I think I did a lot of those things, but the system is really designed to chew up and spit out people like me. and to pound people into submission and to, like we talked about earlier, indoctrinate kids, which I always knew that the whole time going in. But, I always tell people, like, we were just watching something the other day where this mother was very upset that in the curriculum now with these lyrics that were about, anal sex or something. And like, there was like, the NWO song, I don't know if we can swear here or not, so I won't say it, F the police. And what's that?
You can swear. Yeah.
Okay. So fuck the police. And like, she was very upset about it, and totally understandably, why is this in the curriculum? And who knows what the agenda is there. But I was like, no, I'd teach it. I'd take it. And I would say to the students, let's see why did they choose this? What do they think it's for? Let's go ask them. Let's interview them. Like, these are communication skills, right? Let's find out. Then let's look who wrote this and why, who funded them to write it and why, what was going on in the Black community before they wrote these types of things. And, and I would make it an expose on all of these things. So I don't care what curriculum you give me. I'm going to use it to free kids' minds as much as possible. And which is exactly why they would like me to be gone. And it worked. I'm no longer there.
Was it just a lack of freedom, or they didn't like your style or what you were doing?
Yeah, it's complicated. Students love me. Historically, traditionally, 97% of students would say something like, you're one of the best teachers I've ever had. So students loved me. They hated me at first, almost ubiquitously. They were like, you're the worst teacher. We hate you. Why are you doing this to us? And then within a few months, and by the end of the year especially, they're like, you're one of the best teachers we've ever had. We love you. We're going to miss you.
Well, that's a good percentage, 97%, because at least 3% of kids are shitheads. And yeah. I mean, if anybody's ever been around kids, I just started coaching my son's soccer team, and thank God I have patience, because there's some kids there that are, I swear, are only there to make my job difficult. And it's okay, because I was that kid at one point. I remember being that kid who just didn't listen and whatnot. But yeah. So, the fact that the kids liked you and you had that many kids that actually enjoyed your style and what you're doing, that was a great sign.
Well, thank you. I love the shitheads, actually. And the shitheads are the ones that end up being my favorites. And we end up having the best relationships, because I was also a shithead like you too. And so I get it. And I honestly would just respect them and have really clear boundaries. I'm like, no, you can't say that to me, and I still love you. And then they would like throw a desk or something. I'd be like, you need to pick that up and put it back. And then we're going to keep going here or whatever. And it's just calm. What do they call it? Calm and loving, firm, but strong. I don't remember. Firm, but loving. There's like a phrase people use for it, but that was basically my approach. And to treat kids like human beings, and to not pretend like they're like, everyone's trying to play this game with them. Like they don't understand life, or they don't understand what's going on, or like we have to hide things from them. And they're like, no, we understand things. Like we know, in fact, we're going to manipulate you because you're going to treat us as though we don't. And we're going to play this against you. And I just kind of understood all those dynamics. And so they couldn't shock me, because I'd already been there and done all of that. There was nothing they could do or say that would be even remotely surprising to me, and be like, yep, that's what I was doing at your age, or way, way worse. So doesn't shock me, not surprised, not going to pretend like that's not your experience, and also still going to expect you to do work in class and to engage in these ideas with me. You don't get out of that. And, because I think they're used to either having like the hippie cool teacher who's like done all the drugs and like is going to talk to them about stuff, or having these like hard ass teachers who are like really high standards and mean. And I'm like, let's like merge those together. And that's what I'm going to be. But the kids who hated me no matter what until the end were the kids who were basically status zombies. Like they were like bought into the system fully, and they hated that they couldn't manipulate me. These are the kids who tend to get like A's in everybody else's class, but not because they're actually intelligent, but because they know how to kiss ass and turn things in on time. What stay after and ask questions and all of that.
What age were you working with?
6th grade to 12th grade. So I moved around a lot and changed grades a lot. But so basically like 12 to at one school up to like 20 years old. So in that age range. But yeah, so eventually my parents would love me, because they, the parents of normal kids would still have normal kids, and the parents of all the shitty kids usually get pushed out and cast off and suspended and kicked out and F's and whatever would get like C's in my class. And they would be like, oh, we have no idea what you did or how you did it, but we're so grateful. This is the first time they've ever had this positive learning experience. And teachers would come to me and be like, how are you doing this? And I'd be like, oh, I just respect them. And they'd be like, no, but like, how are you doing it? I'm like, no, I literally just respect them. And they're like, no, but I mean, cut the shit. Like, are you just passing them just so they don't like act up in your class? I'm like, no, because that wouldn't be respectful. That would be horribly rude. Like, tell them that they're not worth, you know what I mean? Like, just like, yeah, you can have an A and do nothing. That's not respectful. Like, I have really firm boundaries and I have infinite patience and love, and I respect them. And they just didn't get it. They did not understand how that could possibly work. And so they just hated me, and they just assumed I was lying, and they would always try to like catch me like favoring the bad kids or whatever. And it was crazy. It got crazy. I eventually had principals who hated me. I had to fight with them all the time. I had to get the union on my side. I had to get law involved. I had teachers who would try to sabotage me. My last year teaching, I had teachers who would sneak into my room and steal my files and records on kids. And then the very next day I'd have like a meeting that like required those records, those specific records. And I'm like, I've been teaching for 14 years. I've never lost a record or a file. And now all of a sudden it's gone. And the next day I specifically need it. I've never even needed a record or a file. I've never in my career. You're supposed to keep them all. You never need them. I keep them all, never lost one. Then I had just so happened to lose one and need it the next day. Like, you're not even trying very hard. This is exceptionally transparent. My things were like moved around in my room, and it was just ridiculous. So I started being sabotaged by my coworkers, and my principals hated me. And I finally was just like, you know what? I've like tried way too hard. I've worked my ass off for years and years. The country basically hates you. People generally don't understand even what teachers do. I literally hear people all the time go, teaching must be the easiest job. Like, you just know more than the kids and stand there and make them work. I'm like, good luck with that. Like, have you met kids? Like you said, like, they're assholes. It's a constant battle of, pack programming, and like, I literally use like pack psychology on them, and it's all day, every day. You have to be like on, or else they're slipping out of your grasp, because that's their job as kids, is to find the boundaries and test them, So it just got to be too much. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to be way happier teaching people who actually want to learn. I don't have to deal with management, and I don't have to deal with coworkers who sabotage me and hate me all the time. So I abandoned that.
I'm a big believer of talking to kids like they're adults, and I'm a fan of it. I talk to my kids like that. I get mad at my mother when she talks to my kids like they're, like their age. Like they're idiots. It's like, yeah, they're toddlers. Yeah, they're only 5 and they're only 6, but they are really intelligent and they understand things, and they don't need to be speaking to like they're, newborns. And to me, it benefits them because they learn how to have adult conversations. Like you said, it shows some respect, like their opinions matter and what they have to say matters. I mean, so often you see, and you see, I mean, this isn't just shithead kids in regards to behavior. Like, kids are a product of their environment. I mean, so often you see fat kids, you meet their parents, like, oh, you have fat parents. Oh, you have shithead kids, you meet the parents, like, oh, you have shithead parents. Or sometimes the parents aren't shitheads, they're just not existent. So basically, kids have the green light to turn into shitheads, because if the parents aren't molding them into some type of decent adult, society is, and TV and entertainment, and you're probably gonna not like what you get. So that's why I'm a big believer of, like, as often as I can, like, be the one to answer the kids' questions and help understand whatever curiosity they might have. Because if I'm not molding that, if I'm not contributing to their understanding of the world, then somebody else is. And that might not necessarily be a bad thing, but it could be. So it's like, the more control I can have of it, the better. And I always talk about how, I think life's a giant puzzle piece, or a giant puzzle, and everything you learn is like one more piece of that puzzle. And you hope by the end of your journey, the image becomes clear. You're not going to have all the pieces to the puzzle, but you're going to try to gather as many as possible. And that's what kids are doing too. Kids, everything's confusing at first. They don't understand things, even things that we just don't we don't even think about like things. I mean, sometimes you get asked questions and it's like, oh yeah, like nobody's ever explained this to you, you know? So every conversation you have, you're helping gather one more piece of that puzzle. And that's kind of our, you know, our job as parents. Unfortunately, we live in a country where parenting takes the back seat to careers, takes the back seat to whatever the adults want to do. It's like, you know, it's when you hear, sometimes I hear parents say things like, oh, don't let the kid control your life. And I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? You know, or don't let you know, you shouldn't be friends with your kids. And I'm like, I like, and then I'll get into these ideas because I'm like, okay, what do you mean by that? It's like, don't let the kid control my life because I compromise. Like, there's nothing wrong with compromising with kids. Like, there's things that you have to be stern with. And again, this is just my personal opinion. There's plenty of different ways of parenting. And, but in my personal opinion, like, there's things I'm going to be stern with. And then there's certain things I don't mind compromising. Like, if the kid really wants to do something, if one of my children really want to do something, and for some reason I don't want them to do it, and then, you know, I don't call it giving in. It's like, okay, I'll do this for you, but remember, you know, I met you halfway. I did this favor for you. You know, I let you do something that maybe was an inconvenience to me or whatever, but remember that, and then you'll appreciate it. And then they usually do. They're like, Dad, you're awesome, thank you so much, you know. And then when I am mad about something, I say no, then they know, okay, no, he's serious this time. Because it's like, I've never been a fan of rules. I mean, that's what got me in trouble growing up, was I wasn't a fan of rules. And I never felt like I was a bad kid. I just felt like nobody took the time to really understand me or conversate with me. Everybody just assumed I was a shithead, mostly because I was growing up and a little bit of an outcast. I had a weird journey because, not to make this podcast about me, but just to share a little bit of my, you know, background. When I came to America as a Portuguese immigrant, my English wasn't very good, so I was behind. That's why everybody calls me Ricky, because my real name is Ricardo, which is actually my son's name now. But I told everybody my name was Ricky because I wanted to fit in and I wanted to disguise my Portuguese accent. So I'm like, my name's Ricky. It sounds more American. I'm Ricky. You know, I'm not a Ricardo. You know, so, and then I'm also a twin. So
Oh, wow.
I have this identity crisis where, like, psychologically, you always feel like you're not like you're almost two people are combined as one, and it's like you never feel like you're your own person.
Hmm.
And so I had that, and so I had a bunch of different things, and I got into like metal music, and I, you know, I was the kid wearing Metallica, Maiden, and Slayer shirts to school every day, which, you know, still I listen to that stuff. I just don't look like I listen to that stuff anymore. But it's so I kind of want to become my own, you know, create my own identity. And so yeah, I had all these little and I think that all contributes to me maybe being a little bit of a shithead, just like feeling like I didn't fit in, or feeling like people already didn't like me, or maybe trying to be funny because I wanted people to like me. So all these things. So my point of
Well,
this long rant is that what I think, we don't look at it from that perspective. We forget that we were there at one point, and all those internal things could contribute to why a kid's acting up. It's not as simple as he's just a shithead. Maybe it is that he feels like an outcast. Maybe it is that he has some issues at home. Maybe it is that, you know, he's trying to fit in or trying to be funny because maybe he doesn't have a lot of friends or whatnot. So there's so many other things that we don't factor in. And it's really easy just to kind of dismiss that as like he's just a shithead kid. But, you know, sometimes there are a lot of other contributing factors.
yeah. And that's exactly it. And this is one of the things that people don't get. And it's like, this kid, if they're acting up or they're angry or they're whatever, they're a child. And the reason they're doing that is because they're terrified. They're terrified. So they're acting tough because they need to protect themselves, you know, and adults take it as like, you're disrespecting me. I'm like, oh, it has nothing to do with you, sweetie. Like, that's some ego shit you need to put aside to let go of, and honor the fact that this child is terrified sitting in front of you, and you're in a terrifying situation where most commonly they've been asked to perform in ways that they haven't actually been taught how to yet. Then they fail, then they're mocked for it somehow, even if it's subtle. Even if you're like, you, what's the answer to number 25? Haha, you don't know. You, what's the answer to 25? Like, that's terrifying. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but that was terrifying. If you can like take the stakes away, and you can take that judgment away, and you can take that ego out of it, and you can just recognize this person's terrified, and then use this tool that's so simple that no one uses, even though we've proven for decades and decades in psychology and all these different areas that it's the best possible thing that for any human being, which is called positive reinforcement. It's a simple, simple tool. It's basically kindness and respect. And you don't lie, but you just say things like, you know what? I noticed you're sitting there quietly and I really like that. And they're suddenly like, what? Because they've like never been praised. They've only been judged. They've only been treated like they're a piece of shit, and they've only been terrified. And all of a sudden somebody said something nice to them, and a teacher nonetheless, and they're like, what the hell just happened? And now all of a sudden they love you. And this is why I'm like, it sort of sounds manipulative, but it's not. I'm not trying to manipulate anyone, but I also genuinely want them to realize it doesn't matter how little it is, something you do is good and right and awesome. And every day you can add to that if you want to and get even more good and true and awesome every single day. And then that's why they're like, you're the best teacher I've ever had, and I'm going to miss you. It's just that. It's just that I didn't lie. I didn't say like, you're great at writing when they suck at it. But I was like, look, you wrote something and you filled up a page. And I don't know if you've ever done that before. And that's really cool. And they're like, hey, that's true. And it is good. And it feels good. Now I like I had students walk into my room and they go, I don't know what it is, but I walk into your room and I'm just in a whole different room, like world and a whole different mindset. And I'm like, it's because nothing disrespectful ever happens in here. And it's because unlike the like bullshit, like safe space, like social agenda marketing campaign, it's like actually a safe place where like you're going to have high standards and also love along the way. And none of it's going to be a lie. And you're going to know that because there's another thing, like we were saying, kids are like bullshit detectors. They're like, that's stupid. You're lying to me now. You're buttering me up or you're manipulating me. And like, nobody wants that. It's also not respectful. But most teachers I've worked with can't even get that. They're like, why would you say something good about this kid? Like I've literally had teachers come to me and say, like, I've written letters on their behalf, you know, to try and help them get out of some situation they're in. And why did you write that kid that letter? You realize the whole community is going to see that, right? I'm like, cool. So, and they're like, well, that's a bad kid. I'm like, so you want me to like not do the right thing by writing what I think is the truth openly and sharing it with people because they've been judged as a bad kid. So we should just let the law fuck them over. Like, this is insane. Like, there's something wrong with you. You didn't get what you needed as a child, and now you're taking it out on the rest of humanity. It's really sad.
How messed up the school system is. Yeah. You know, much like yourself, I've talked to a lot of different guests. I'm respectful. I get along with a lot of people. Most people would never know that the school system put me in special ed at a very young age. Mm-hmm. My freshman year in high school, I was with this teacher who came from a alternative school, and he taught me, and I think it was like another, I don't know, 7 kids. He taught us every subject because they didn't trust us going to regular classes or even roaming the hallways. So this one teacher would teach us. We would be stuck in one class all day. God. But the cool thing is it was a blessing because the teacher came from a alternative school, and he's like, you guys are the ones that like are bad kids. He's like, I spend 90% of the time breaking people up in the last school. He's like, you guys are fine. He's like, you know, and it made us feel good because we're like, yeah, maybe we're not bad kids, you know. And he took the time to talk to us, and he was so. It was amazing how he handled it because he would fight with the principal over our behalf because if he taught us all everything, we got everything done early, he would do crazy shit. Like he would let us watch like rated R movies. We had all our doors taped, and he knew we watched this stuff already, so he didn't care, you know. We would tape all that stuff. If the principal would try coming in the door, he would lock the door. And then like, it was like, no, this is my time with the kids. Like, these are my kids. You wanted me to handle them because nobody else could. So like, these are my response. Don't get mad at me about my tactics or whatever. If there's any issues with the parents or the kids, I'll deal with that. But nobody's complaining, so you shouldn't be getting involved. And he let us have an air hockey table, which like the whole floor would hear and be jealous that we got to play air hockey. It was awesome. It was actually a really awesome experience, but he actually cared. And you know, one thing that it helped with us is like we started rethinking the way we look at ourselves, because we started adopting the way the school system looked at us, like we're dumb, misbehaving kids. And all of a sudden we had an adult that said otherwise. So now we started rethinking, like maybe we aren't dumb. Maybe we weren't. Maybe it's not that. And really, when I left school, I think was it Mark Twain who said, Mark Twain always says all the best quotes. Is he the one who said that school got in the way of his learning? Somebody.
Yeah, I think it was him.
Yeah. And I felt like that. So when I left high school, I barely graduated. I left high school, and I mean, I remember I had a biology teacher. I don't know which grade it was, where she's like, "No, you're not in my class." And because she just heard that I was a bad kid, so every day during that class, I had to go to the principal's office and just wait there. I never took her class more like once. The first day in her class, I had to go. So it was actually cool because the principal was like, "Listen, you're not going to stay here every day. I'm going to send you with the custodian, and you're going to help him out." So me and the custodian became friends. So it was
That's
actually
awesome.
it was pretty cool, and he was actually really cool. So it was fun. But yeah, I mean, but these like my stories. I mean, there's so many stories like this where like now I look back and I'm like, wait, I didn't dislike learning. All I do now is like listen to podcasts, watch documentaries, read, like try to get as much information as possible. And I'm like, so how could the schools, and I know plenty of people who did way better in school who end up going to college who really like stop learning. Like they just regurgitate information. Maybe they were never interested in learning. They just regurgitated information to get by and get that high paying job, but wasn't really into learning. And myself, like I go somewhere and people are like, oh, you know a little bit about a lot of things or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, because I'm like I enjoy learning. I'm constantly, if I don't know something, I want to learn a little bit about it, and then I go here and I go there, and so there's so many kids like myself that think that they don't like to read or they don't like to learn or they don't like science and it's really not that they don't like those things. They just don't like the way they were force fed that information. Nobody found a creative way to get them engaged or to get them to find that information fascinating. And unfortunately, sometimes by the time you do start learning that, like you're out of school and but I guess looking back, it's probably not the worst thing, that I kind of gave up on school and kind of moved on with my life, because who knows, you go to a university now, like we said, like it's a place where they teach you what to think, not how to think. So it could be scary where you're a young person looking for answers. You feel like this adult that you respect is giving you the right answers. You adopt those answers as your own. And next thing you know, your worldview was never really a worldview that explored different ideas. It was just you adopted somebody else's ideas, and that's what's. How do you think you got away from all that? Like how did it not work on you?
I was raised questioning everything, literally. My, kids are naturally questioners. Like we were saying, they're going to ask you these questions and you're going to be like, oh my God, I didn't even consider that could be a question. And like, of course you want to know this thing. And like, how am I going to answer this thing? And a lot of parents, like we talked about too, were just like, shut up, like get out of here. Like I'm busy. I need to drink this beer. I need to go do whatever. Like you're like the last thing I'm thinking of, which is a shame. But I was very lucky in that my mom would constantly answer any question I had. And I had a lot of them. And so I learned that it was good to ask questions and that someone would try to answer them. And one of the things I learned by that too, was she would say sometimes, I don't know. We're going to have to find out. Let's try to find out. We'll go to the library someday or whatever. We'll try to figure it out. This is before the internet. So, so I had that too. We're like, oh, adults don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. And so asking questions is good. Ask as many questions as you can. That's how you learn. And also don't expect that adults are going to know everything. Then I had this father who taught me that, because he went to Vietnam and that whole mess. And before he died, he taught us very clearly, you do not trust the government ever. Whatever the government's saying, probably a lie. Go find out. It might not be, but don't trust the government and don't trust the media either. They're both going to lie to you. They're salesmen and they're just trying to get something from you. So I had this perspective that was like, there is no real authority. And when the people say they are authorities, you should especially question them then. They're probably lying to you and trying to get something out of you. When I went to school, they did the flag salute. My dad was like, you don't have to salute a flag. Like, you don't owe anything to that flag. That's a mind washing technique. And like, you don't need to do that. If you want to, do it, but don't do it if you don't want to. And I was like, I'm not going to do it then. And so then I learned you don't have to do anything either. You have this freedom to like choose what you want to do. And I just was given a lot of freedom, a lot of critical thinking skills, and a lot of support in that. So I just grew up kind of with all of those mindsets. And I think that did it for me. And that's part of what I tried to give my students. And when I was a teacher as well, is I don't even care if you come out of my class having read any of the books that we were supposed to read. I don't care if you wrote any of the essays we were supposed to write. I don't care about anything except that hopefully you learned a little something about how to think and not what to think. And, you know, I always said to people, my goal is that none of my students have any idea what my views are on anything. They should never know if I give a shit about a president or not, if I voted or not, if I think guns are good or not, none of it. They should never know that, because it doesn't matter and it never should matter. And if they knew, even if I brought it up in a way where I wasn't trying to influence them, it would influence them. So I don't want to influence them because that's their decision to make, but I do want to try to help them get to that point where they are questioning everything, not seeing anyone as an authority automatically, and learning how to evaluate information to see what they think about it and develop their own point of view in that way. There is no better set of skills that you could have, because then, like you were saying, you could learn forever and you could learn from everything and from anything. And even if things are given to you as like propaganda, indoctrination, brainwashing, you can use that to learn from too. Like, okay, why are they doing this? And what do they want out of it? What's the goal and who's doing it? And, you know, anything could be a learning experience then. So ideally, I gave that to some people, hopefully, or I helped it get deeper in them. But I think that's why I just kind of always had that. And so I've been a conspiracy theorist since I was a little kid, and I've never stopped.
So how did you get into communism then? Because it sounds like it conflicts with don't trust anybody, right?
Well, okay, so communism is sold to you as you are in control finally. There is no government. There's not going to be a government. There's going to be a government of the proletariat, and you're the proletariat. So now there is no authority, and you get to design this beautiful society finally as you see fit, because
you know, like anarcho-libertarian or the anarchist type of philosophy, where it's like you just don't have a ruler. You know, you basically, you know, you're your own person. You know, it's not well, what do they usually say? We're not saying there aren't any rules. We're just saying there aren't any rulers, because I know a lot of people talk about anarchism as like just it'd be chaos. It'd be and they would say, no, we're not saying there's not any rules. We're just saying there's no rulers. So it sounds like a very similar type of idea sold to people who get into communism.
Yeah, and it's actually communism in its purest state. And this is as opposed to a communist state, which is confusing. So communism in its purest form has the end result is exactly the same as the end result of anarchy and socialism. And all of those share this vision that there will be no government. There's no centralized government. However, communism also tends to accept the necessary and, you know, short-lived, they say, evil of having a government that transitions you from this capitalist hell into that glorious communist utopia. So you do accept the ruling party's dictatorship in the transition time, and that's the communist state. It's all a fairy tale, but at the time it seemed very plausible, because in my mind I was like, well, anarchy actually does seem like the only livable, lasting solution for a worldwide, you know, positive experience. But you can't just go straight from this to anarchy. So how do you do it? Oh, you do communism. You do communism, you do the communist state. And then when you get there, you're basically in anarchy at the end. You don't have a government. They dissolved the government. This is a beautiful fairy tale. So it was very appealing. And part of, I'll say, what really appealed to me was that I saw all of the pain and suffering that the psychopath class causes all around the world and has forever. And all these wars are on their behalf. All of these corporations are raping and pillaging the earth, and, you know, their CEOs are making billions, and then the people at the bottom are making nothing and have no health care. And, you know, all these ills, I thought, would be beautifully solved by communism.
Well, I think as a ism, as just a ideology on how to run a economy or a society, I mean, in theory, there's things about it that are appealing, like this idea of that there are no classes, there are no, basically everything's equal because, there aren't any classes, people aren't being judged by certain things. Um, was there any book or a professor? What got you into it? Or a podcast, documentary? What made you initially intrigued with the idea?
I technically initially it was a high school class I had at an alternative school that I went to for a year, in which my teacher we had to create a way in which to represent all political philosophies at once. And then we also had to then choose which one we thought was most ideal. And then we had to sort of design our own country based around our chosen philosophy. So it was a really cool project, really immersive and really self-directed. Uh, and I looked at all of these things and I read about communism and I was like, well, this is awesome. I mean, everybody finally gets what they need, right? I grew up really, really poor. We didn't have a house sometimes. We didn't have food sometimes. Like, we did not have what we needed much of the time. And so to think that there would be this way that no one would have to experience that and everyone would have at least a home and food and at least these things that you need. And then maybe more than that too, was like this just beautiful dream. I was, again, very enamored by this vision that we could make a world like that, and that all it would require was that these ridiculously wealthy people would just not have that much ridiculous wealth, and then we just balance it out a little bit and just give everybody what they need, and maybe by force, because if people can't share, maybe you take their toys away from them. So it made sense then. And then as I went through college, I actually went to the Evergreen State College, where it wasn't nearly as radical then as it is now, but there was definitely still lots of room for radical and fringe and other and all of that. And so, there was some communist foment there, as there is on every, I think, college campus. And then my sister she got into socialist clubs and stuff in her college and another state nearby. And she started then getting into local community groups and getting more and more into movements. And then the whole anti-war 2003 or so really hit, and we started organizing for that. And as I was organizing for the anti-war movements, I started working with her communist cells, and so then I got more and more literature. And I wouldn't say there was any one book or author or anything. There was just a lot of little essays and pamphlets and readings and snippets of Lenin and Mao and all these things that were meant to inspire and did. And so I got deeper and deeper into it in that way.
Well, a lot of those philosophies, and even with Karl Marx, I mean, it was more like anti-capitalist. Like, they understood, they were dissecting capitalism and saying, here are the issues, and maybe this is how we resolve these issues. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I think one of the things that we do a really good job at is demonizing a certain ideology, and because there's a example of somebody who took advantage of it or manipulated it, and not really going deep into that ideology and being like, okay, what's the actual theory, what's the actual ideas that spawn this ideology. And I think that's important, because a lot of times you realize, like, oh, this isn't inherently evil. Like, it's not, capitalism isn't inherently evil, but there's plenty of examples of it doing bad things to the world, in regards to chemical companies that will throw stuff in the water, dispose of chemicals in the water because it's cheaper than doing it correctly. There's tons I mean, obviously big pharma and what they're trying to do now with just trying to force feed everybody a vaccine that is harmful for the purpose of trying to make maximum profit. And now it's trying to sell a booster shot, and then trying to sell basically the idea of getting a shot every 6 months or every couple months. That's, you can say, a symptom of capitalism, and you can make that argument. So if you're somebody looking at that and kind of dissecting all the flaws of it, and then be like, okay, well, socialism, that might be a good alternative, or communism might be a good alternative. But again, those will have those issues too, because like you said, who enforces those rules? And I probably the answer to, and they're all just isms. They're all just different philosophies on how to run a society, or have a society, or run an economy. There's a great professor. After I left high school, I was always really intrigued with philosophy. There's a professor, a Harvard philosopher, who wrote the book What Money Can't Buy. He wrote quite a few books, but that was one that I remember reading, one of the first ones I read. And he put his whole semester online, and I remember just him constantly saying how, like, we were supposed to be a capitalistic economy, and now we've become a capitalistic society, where like now it basically has seeped into the way we look at the world, the way we treat people, things, our priorities, our desires, our wants. Like everything revolves around getting more and constantly getting more, and then screwing somebody else to get more. And it to me, that was really interesting. I've had Professor Richard Wolff on the show, who is he's well known for being a historian with of Karl Marx and socialism, and when you hear him discuss Karl Marx's ideas, like, he doesn't seem like a evil person. He doesn't, and he probably wasn't. I mean, he was a person who disagreed with capitalism, saw these flaws, saw these issues, and then he had his own ideas on how to possibly remold society in a way where you could avoid those issues. And so even when you look at, like, historically, when we were invading Latin American countries because we're fighting socialism, and people still say that, like, oh, that's a socialist country. They almost put a, like, they communism, socialism, like, we just use these isms, and then just a lot of times people don't even know what they mean, or they don't know the history behind the word, they don't know the history behind the philosophy. And it really is just propaganda. And it's like, when you try to tell somebody, like, hey, socialism, like, it's as inherently evil as capitalism is. Like, you can make the argument that both have flaws, both can eventually, if manipulated the right way, can be used for bad things instead of good things. And they're just, in the world we live in, it really is a mixture of just about all of them. You can see examples of all these things. I mean, having public, public or tax money pay for public roads, tax money pay for postal service, pay for police. I mean, those are all socialist ideas, and yet somebody will be like, yeah, socialism is bad. I'm like, well, you do realize, like, we have some hybrid system that includes socialist ideas, and their brain blows up. They're like, well, what do you mean? And you start explaining it, and they're like, oh, that's not socialism. I'm like, how is that not socialism? If we're all contributing for a service as a society, we all say we're all going to pitch in for the service. That's inspired by socialism. That's basically what socialism is attempting to do, like saying, hey, there's some services we should all pitch in for. And so it's amazing how many people use these words and don't even, I mean, there's probably people listening to this now who are like, wait, she was a communist, like, what the I'll never listen to her show again, and they don't even know
Probably.
what communism is, and so
Right.
to me, it's like, it's so important to understand the history behind it, and of the words and the ideologies, and not just get somebody's interpretation on what they think it is.
Yeah. I mean, even anarchy, right? Like you said, people think that means chaos. They'll use it in place of chaos, and it has nothing to do with chaos. But that's all people know, and that's all they care. And so that's how it's going to be. And it's exactly the same with every ism, like you said. And every single place on earth, like you said too, it is a hybrid. There is no pure anything. There's no pure system. So when people say, like, oh, well, you can't attack communism for that because it's never actually been done right. Well, that's also true of capitalism. So you also then can't attack capitalism because it's never been done purely or right. In quotes, right, whatever right is for each of these isms, none of them have ever been done. You can't do any of them purely. And there's a reason for that, right? Because we don't live in a vacuum of purity, and we don't live in a perfect place where things can just pluck out of the ideal and just become true. Like, that's not how humans work. That's not how nature works. That's not what's going on here. But it's important, like you said, to understand each of these. And I think what's even more important, and we can all apply this to our lives with every single person we interact with all of the time, is to understand why. Why would somebody be a communist? Or why would somebody be a socialist? Or why would somebody be a capitalist? And why would somebody who understands all of those still choose one over the other? Because sometimes people get, like, narrowly, like, okay, I got just like sluiced off into capitalism, and that's just where I stayed, and I never looked at the others. Well, some people have looked at all of them and then still take capitalism or still take communism. So why? What are their motivations and their values that they think are going to be met in this system? Because that's where we can actually start to find common ground, and just, like, take these labels off and get rid of them. They're kind of pointless in the end. and you're never going to do any of them purely anyway. So what can you do instead? Well, you could work with the people around you in common ground and say, like, what do you value? Like, you just heard me talk about what I valued was that people wouldn't be left in abject poverty and not have food. That's all. That's a pretty simple value, actually. Sorry, my light is apparently going crazy, so we're just gonna have disco for the rest of the show. But and I just think it's important to recognize those things and recognize the humanity in people. And we see this with politics all the time, right? People are like, oh, well, I love Trump, and other people are like, oh my God, you must be a racist idiot from the like deep South who's never read a book. And it's like, why would that be true? Go ask them, why do they like Trump? What do they like about them? What do they value? You will find that you probably hold the same value. You might not see that Trump fulfills it, and they do. That might be something you never agree on, but you probably have the same human value. Most of us do actually have the same values. We just disagree with how to go about fulfilling them or solving the problem that we see. We seem to have agreed that it is okay to combine our money in ways to pay for services in common. That seems to be a pretty worldwide established thing that we do. So like you said, socialism, it exists in that way. And most of us have accepted that it's okay to do that. And we, in fact, don't mind it. Most of us, however, don't really agree that maybe like a third to a quarter of every paycheck should be taken, and that 80% of that should go to just killing people in random countries for reasons we're not even really sure of what's going on, that we're not necessarily as ubiquitously okay with. And so maybe we could come together on that even and say, I don't really care if you're communist, anarchist, socialist, like Democrat, Republican, or whatever. Can we stop having such a gigantic portion of our money taken and spent on a war machine? Like, that'd be cool. I think most of us actually are down with that. And this is part of why they want us to keep continuously fighting over things like communism and capitalism and Democrats and Republicans, because then we will never come together and do anything about it. And this is one of the things that's beautiful about Marx and some of these other people and their philosophy, is reminding people, no matter what the power dynamic, there is always more of us than there are of them. That's all that's ever going to be true. In fact, the power tends to centralize, and that means fewer and fewer people have it. And that means more and more and more of us are the people who probably want to do something about it and change it to our benefit rather than their benefit. There's more of us than there are of them. And we have, as they say, and as we said the last time we talked, little to lose but their chains. So maybe we can all get together on some of that. So finding common ground and speaking to each other like humans, taking off the labels and really seeing like, well, what can we actually do? I think is way more important anyway. It's super fun for me to philosophize. I love political and social philosophy, and I love history and movements and all of these things. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, it's not going to matter as much as who has the power, who can we ally with, and what do we already share in common.
Well, yeah, what you're saying is so important, because it's so true that the majority of people, if they discuss what they want out of life and society, instead of how to get there, most people will agree on just about everything. Like, we all want the same things. Where we differ is, how do we get there? How do we get those things? So often the media, TV, everything, like, they divide us based on like that part of the discussion. Like, okay, what, do we want this type of economy? Do we want that type of economy? Do we want this type of schooling, that type of schooling? But the truth is, like, we all want the same things. We just differ on how to go about it. And it really is just another technique of divide and conquer. But yeah, I mean, it's all people just I don't think they question why they believe things. I think too often, and this kind of goes into spirituality a little bit, like kind of the benefits of it. And one of the reasons why I think it's important for people, and even if you don't consider yourself a spiritual person, maybe use some of those spiritual techniques to look inside and figure out, okay, why do I believe this? Why do I dislike that person? Why have I decided that capitalism is the route to happiness, or the way the world should be run, or socialism, or whatever it may be, whatever idea that you end up making your own? Just ask, like, was this something that a conclusion I came to on my own? Is it something that because being a teacher, being an adult just in general, and going back to kind of discussing things with children, when you're an adult, I mean, so many times you have these little discussions with kids, and you never know which conversation sticks with them forever. And as adults, we look back, we know that happens. Like there'll be certain little life events that don't seem as significant at the time. And then you look back and like, why the fuck is that still in my head? Why is that scarred in my memory? And other things that you would think are more significant aren't. Or why did this little conversation have such an impact on my worldview or who I am or whatever? And so I think a lot of times we need to kind of pump the brakes and be like, okay, something that we think we're so passionate about and we're so sure of might be a idea we didn't really come up with on our own, or a conclusion that we didn't really explore too many perspectives before coming to, because we adopted somebody else's ideas and perspectives or whatever. You know, when how many people regurgitate communism is bad, socialism is bad, or are people on the other end, capitalism is bad, you know, and they don't even really understand why they're saying it or where the origin story of those ideas are. So I mean, self-reflecting, and this is where like this, I mean, this is why this is all kind of connected, you know, writing, music, poetry, philosophy, all these things are exercises and things that can help you better understand not just the world around you but yourself, which I think is probably the most important place to start.
Yeah, that's well said. It's really true. And a lot of these things, this is part of why I love what both of us do, you know, talking to people and exploring ideas, because I come up against something every once in a while. I'm like, oh my God, there's another thing I never questioned yet. Like, why do I think that? And where did it come from? And what have I not looked at therefore? And I love those moments. Like when Flat Earth came up, I was like, that's so stupid. And then I was like, wait, what? I've never thought of it. I've never questioned it. What if it is? And even if you just look into it and then go back to the earth being flat, around, I don't even care. The exercise of questioning something you've never questioned is so fun, and it's so cool because you have to go examining and you learn from that no matter what. You know, just like we were saying earlier, you actually learn from everything. So why not go questioning things? The only thing you have to lose is your illusions or your you know, misunderstandings or your ignorance. Otherwise, the truth will be reinforced. The earth will still be a globe and you'll carry on, or whatever it is, right? So there's nothing to fear in exploring these things. And a lot of them are from places we don't even know. And this was actually interesting when I was getting into communism. My first reactions to it were sort of like, you know, I had had that experience in class where I had like discovered like, oh, communism's the one that's going to give things to the poor people. And so we need that one. That's the one I'm going to go with. And then shortly after that, though, my sister actually brought to me some idea or whatever. And she said Mao Zedong. And I was like, oh, isn't he evil? And she was like, why do you think that? And I was like, honestly, I don't know. I don't even know why I know his name. Like, I don't even know like which history class this came from, or like in my brain, this man is evil. And I've never thought of why. And so, which is why I then started reading some of his work, and he didn't seem evil at all in his writing, at least. And maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. I wasn't there to see and document it, and I still am not sure if he was good, bad, or in between. But some of his writing is beautiful, and some of his ideas are amazing. And I still don't know where that negative idea of him came from, although I see it now more clearly. But at the time, I was pretty young, and you know, I couldn't like pinpoint it. But now I just see it repeated everywhere. Mao Zedong killed millions of people, and he's an evil guy. The end. Like no one really has questioned it, thought of it, or looked at those numbers, where they came from, who put the numbers together, all these types of things that would make us critical thinkers. So it is good to question everything you can about yourself, and like you said, learn to self-reflect and dive in and just see what ideas do I have and why. And they're kind of hard to find just on your own, but take moments like that where you're confronted with something and you have a reaction, and then ask yourself, where did that come from and why do I feel that way? And is it based on, you know, well-founded, well-researched, well-studied sort of ideas, or does it just floating around in there from who knows where, and I just like clung on to it? I'm sure there's a lot of them there. But it's interesting too. I was thinking about, you know, we often pose it like this: are we going to do capitalism or are we going to do communism? And I'm always like, well, why are those the two choices? Like, why are we stuck in this false dichotomy, exactly like our political sphere here in the US, at least? Are you a Democrat or are you Republican? I'm like, well, what if I'm completely other thing. What if you haven't even mentioned it? What if neither of them even come close to what I am? Like, what then? This false dichotomy that we have keeps us limited and stuck in this debate, and we just keep circling through the debate over and over again, decade after decade, hundreds of years after hundreds of years. We're still having this question: is it communism or is it capitalism? Is there no other option? Is there not like something we haven't really thought of or defined yet that's maybe decentralized but connected, and local, but also supporting interaction on a larger scale, and supports workers' rights, but also doesn't get these entrenched gigantic unions that end up just being a betrayal to the people they're supposed to serve? And can't we find answers to all of these things without committing to just this or this that are diametrically opposed? Like, I think we can go beyond all of that.
Yeah, the flat earth thing is interesting because it's a great way to see if somebody will immediately dismiss something based on what they think they understand or know, and not even look into it at all, or not even explore the idea at all, because we do that all the time. And we think like, okay, flat earth is an extreme example, because I mean, this idea that the whole earth is flat, and we've been taught that it's round, and there's pictures and there's science and all this stuff. But it's a great test to see like, okay, will I? Because that same reaction you'll do with other things, this idea that like, okay, maybe it won't be as a extreme, worldview shattering type of thing, like finding out the earth is flat or round or whatever, but it's something else. And it's like, okay, I already decided that this is where I stand. And then when I hear something that conflicts that, I'm just going to immediately go, that's silly. No, that's wrong. So flat earth is kind of a good, because it's like, if you're willing to explore that, even if you're one of those people that you're like, I think it's the most ridiculous thing ever, but if you're willing to explore it, not because you believe it, but because you're like, you know what, let me give it the benefit of the doubt, then that's good. I mean, I think that's a sign that you're more likely a truth seeker, and you're more likely willing to admit when you're wrong, or willing to explore ideas that go against your own ideas. That's the type of people we want, people who are willing to do that. Because if not, you could join a team and just defend that team, and you could be wrong, but you could be convinced you're right, not because of information or because you've explored everything, but just because you're defending that team. And so you're passionate, and it's more about how you feel than how you think. So but yeah, that's like, I remember back in the day, the Zeitgeist films, and I've had a lot of libertarians and anarchists. I know when I would talk to James Corbett a lot back in the day, I would bring it up. I'd be like, I know you don't like design guys, because we would talk about how like society the way it is now doesn't have to be like this. Like we think that like any way to have a civil society, it would have to be some weird version of what we have now, like slightly different. But that's not true either. What I liked about the Zeitgeist movement, it basically made you rethink everything. It's like, well, no, we're told as children, like, oh, this is, you go to work 9 to 5, you do this, you pay for things this way. Like all these things are inherited, that we're told like, this is just the way the world works. This is how things are run. But when you see things like the Zeitgeist movement or any other extremely different way of looking at the world, I think it's good to like get that reminder. Wow, maybe there are other ways. Maybe there are completely what seem to be extreme ways of having a civil society that is different than what we have now. But yet we've been tricked to believe that anything that is different would have to be some slightly different variation to what we have already. And it's almost the same technique they do with politics, where a Ron Paul or a Ross Perot or anybody who's like drastically different comes and they say, no, we know the political system's messed up, but that's too extreme. That's too, that we need something that just slightly different. So then you end up just getting more of the same, instead of being like, you know what? Fuck this shit. Like let's rethink this whole thing. Let's literally start from the ground up, instead of just kind of slightly changing things, mild little changes. No, let's like rethink everything. I mean, that's like even the UBI conversation. And again, I know a lot of people that are fans of the show are libertarians and or they lean right, and they don't like that whole thing. But I think that it is it is linked to our school system. The reason why I think a lot of people don't think it would work is because our school systems have made us basically like zombies that regurgitate information instead of people who pursue passions and really exercise our imagination and creativity. And I remember Hunter Motz. I don't know if you know who Hunter Motz is, but he wrote the book The Straight A Conspiracy. He used to have a show with Brian Callen back in the day, called the Brian Callen Show, I think, and then it changed to Mixed Mental Arts. And me and Hunter got close for a while. We were doing a lot of shows together and stuff. And I remember him telling me about this study, and he was actually a tutor and he went to Harvard and all this stuff. But straight A conspiracy, the conspiracy was that there is no such thing as math kids or these type of kids. Like everybody's capable of it. You know, that's the conspiracy. That's the little trick that we've been that we fell for. This idea that like, oh, I'm just not good at math because I suck at math. They're like, no, you're not good at math because you haven't had a math teacher who
Yeah.
made it intriguing to you or made it fun or whatever. But I remember him telling me this story about the study about like they had young kid, or I don't know what grade they started at, but they started with young kids, or like, how many of you are creative? Like everybody put their hand up, and then every grade less and less kids put their hands up. And I don't think it's because people stop being creative. I think it's because the school systems tell you that's a waste of time. Focus on some shit that's going to get you a high paying job. And so I think we're all capable of it. So when we talk about UBI, and one of the biggest issues with it, or one of the biggest flaws some people would say with it, is that like, how do you like how is it going to work when people are just going to milk the system and not contribute anything? And I say inherently, I think people are inherently creative and have desires and passions and want to do something that's fulfilling, and then we create a system that basically filters those people out or brainwash them into believing other ideas. So if we could fix the school system, where what you're doing is you're really getting people to focus on being creative or a passion or desires, and doing something fulfilling, and the importance of those jobs, the importance of doing something fulfilling compared to the importance of doing something that puts a lot of ones and zeros in the bank account. Because what we've done, we've said that like that's the most important thing. Get the most high paying job possible. We look up to people who make a lot of money, who could be miserable, could be unhappy, could be neglecting their kids, could be completely just focused on their career and neglecting their wives, their husbands, their kids, their family members. Could be a person who says fuck morals, like it's all about the bottom line, so I'm going to do something that some people might consider wrong, but my goal is to make maximum profit. So I think all these things, they contribute to the issues that maybe having a universal basic income could have. But if we start molding people into saying like, no, pursue your passions, being happy is much more important than being wealthy, then I think that you could have a UBI where it's like, okay, this covers your most basic needs. So you have the comfort and you have the confidence that you can pursue something that maybe financially isn't or financially you don't get a lot of out of at the moment, but you have the comfort of knowing you're not going to be hungry, you're not going to be homeless, and you can keep pursuing that thing until maybe you are successful at it. Where the majority of people, you come out of school in debt, so whatever job you have, you end up sticking with, because it's like, I just need job security. I don't need a job that makes me happy or I'm good at or whatever. I just need a job that pays the bills because I'm stuck with all this debt. And so I think it's kind of a sabotaged American dream, this idea of like go to college, go to university, get this high paying job, get that white picket fence. It's like, first of all, that's not for everybody. Second of all, a lot of people who go down that road thinking that happiness is at the end of that road, they find out like, holy shit, all I have is a high paying job that I need to that I hate, that I need to buy material things to kind of keep me happy because I'm miserable. And then I've also invested more time in this job than I have my kids or my family or whatever. So those things are sacrificing. Does that all make sense? What I'm
Oh,
saying?
yeah. No, it totally makes sense. In fact, this was some of the biggest struggles that I had, when I was a communist trying to convince other people that communism was the best way, is they would make that exact argument. Well, nobody has any incentive to do anything. And we do see that. We see evidence of that in our current world, in our current society, that if people don't have economic motivation to perform better, that they probably won't try as hard unless they are passionate about and love the purpose of their job, which is rare, because not many people have a job that they actually love the purpose of. They have a job where they're just doing it to get money. So if that's the case, you do have to actually have profit incentives for them, or else they may not do better, most of them most of the time. And if you have meaning behind it in it, which is why then companies started to do this whole like team building and like Walmart slave mentality, where they all get there in the morning and like chant together, like they thought that would give them purpose, which is just really so misguided and stupid. But it's true. But what you're saying then is also true, that if we had a school system that encouraged passion over and that motivate, that internal motivation over this externalized, you need to get praise from a teacher and you need to get an A and then you need to get a degree and then you need to get a job, and all of this is coming from outside of you. And if instead we inculcated this internal system of motivation, that would be a completely different ball game. And there's a reason why the education system wasn't designed to do that. It wasn't designed to produce debt slaves, because that's modern slavery, right? And instead of free individuals who can think and produce out of a creative spot of genius, there's a test that they can give to kids, and I think it's actually called the Genius Test. And it basically comes down to giving them a series of objects and saying, how many things can you do with this? And then they just like brainstorm, like, oh, we could do this, oh, we could do that, we could do that, da, da, da. People who score really high on it are considered geniuses, and people who score low are not. And as children, as like kindergartners, kids who get this test score at the genius level nearly 100% of the time. And each year they test them, and each year they have less and less and less geniuses. So how do you take genius away from someone? We always think of it the other way around. You have to work really hard and then you'll become a genius. Like, no, you were born a genius. You lived in your genius until the school system killed it, murdered it, cut it out of you, and threw it away because it doesn't make money for them. That's the most sad thing I've ever heard in my life. This is what our education system is for. So if you do a completely radically different type of education, which has been my passion my entire career, is to get as close as I can to this. And I actually did entire portions of my year that I called the Genius Hour, in which I literally just told kids, do something. And they would just do something. And this is part of the time where I was describing earlier, where they'd be like, why are you doing this to us? We hate you. And I'm like, I just told you could do anything you want right now. Do anything you want, as long as you're learning something and researching something. That's all. It could be something you already know about. You don't even have to learn a new thing. And they hated it because they hadn't had freedom since before kindergarten, and they didn't know what to do with it, and it scared them, and they weren't sure if they were doing it right because there's no rules about it. What are the rules? What are the parameters? There's no parameter. You do whatever you want. And this goes back to that same argument. If you don't give someone you have to do it like this and you have to do it in this time, then what's their motivation? If they already have the money, what's their motivation? Well, Genius Hour was evidence that people will still continue to do things, even though the reward doesn't change depending on how much they do. So I had kids who taught themselves new languages in 3 months of Genius Hour, just 1 hour a week of just learning on their own something they were interested in. They didn't do that in a language class. They did it on their own. Right? I had kids who taught themselves how to replace their engines. I had kids who like put together new reading programs for the district and like all of these things. And then I had kids who did like a PowerPoint on different kinds of sharks, but that also is cool because that's what they wanted to do. And this was another thing that teachers hated me for, and that administrators hated me for, and that I was attacked for, but students and parents loved it because the parents could see their kids would come home those days and be like, whoa, I got to do this thing. And it was like they were a kid again, in high school. And so that motivation is there in all of us. We have it inside of us. There's things we love. We love our passions, and it doesn't even matter what they are, right? Your passion could be like corkscrews or something. Like, I don't care. There's something valuable there for you, and you're going to find out what it is. And if you're reading or talking or listening or whatever, watching, whatever it is to gather information on that, it doesn't matter how you're doing it. You're still learning. And then who knows what? Somebody could invent like a whole new thing just because they had that freedom to go explore something they genuinely loved. And that is, I think, what would happen if we could have a society that created that and invited that and had that style of education, rather than the society where we've decided for some reason you need to learn about ancient Egypt when you're 11 and Greece when you're 12. And like, why then? Why that? Like, why is that so crucial at this age that you're like reading, Go Tell Alice or something? I don't know. Whatever it is, like, is that what's most important for this child right here, right now? Or is that just the laziest, easiest way we thought of to break people into slaves? Because I think we can do better. I think we can have a lot more freedom. I think we can keep that passion and that genius intact if we had more freedom. And that, like we've been talking about over and over again this whole episode, people love to learn and people love to create. And when you find someone who doesn't love to learn and create, it's not because they don't, it's because it was killed and they haven't rekindled it yet, but they can. Everybody's a math person.
Yeah, what you're saying is so important. One thing that I love the way you said it. I think I was trying to say the same thing. I just took me like 20 minutes to say it. That people who need money as a motivation usually don't like their job. They're unhappy. And if you find something you love, you don't need the money motivation. And if you look at like all the great thinkers, writers, authors, philosophers, musicians, any creative job you can or person throughout history, look into their history and who they are and what motivated them. Money will never be one. It will never be a motivator. People aren't motivated by that. I mean, in music, I always use music as an example because it's a perfect example and one that there's endless amounts of examples of it, where you'll have somebody who loves whatever they're doing, whatever genre they're creating or being a part of, whatever the creative thing that they're doing, and it breaks through, and then all of a sudden all the copycats come. And the copycats come because of the money motivator. The person who did it the first time was because they love their art and maybe they're trying to push its limits or try to create something new. And those money motivators aren't real artists, and they end up dying and nobody cares who they are, and they're one-hit wonders. And the ones who stand the test of time, who become a part of musical history, are the ones who weren't motivated by money. They went against the grain. They did something different. So I think that's absolutely such an important point you were making. And then same thing with I love the fact that you basically they are killing geniuses when we're born geniuses. And I think one of the reasons isn't just the money motivator, but it's also because they're a threat. People who think for themselves are a threat to establishment. So we have a system. Anybody who can see that the system's broken and messed up and doesn't benefit them is a threat to that system continuing. So that's why you want to keep people doing what they're doing, So without a doubt, I mean, those are all such important points, and that's what I love about long form discussions. You never know where it goes and what ideas end up spawning in the discussion. But I know I've taken up a lot of your time. For people listening who want to stay connected with you, let them know what social media platforms are on, websites you can direct them to. I know you have two shows where they can get those if they're on any video platforms. Also, I know you're also on Rockfin like I am, so you can let people know about that.
Yeah, thank you. I have my site, which is the main hub. So if people want to go to a site, they can go to rogueways.org. And it's rogue ways, not waves like the ocean, but ways like pathways that we walk down. So rogueways.org. And you can find links to the show there, and you can find my writing there, my books there. I do educational consultation. I do all sorts of spiritual work with people as well, which we didn't touch on, but is there if you want to go explore that. And you can find the show on YouTube, on Rockfin. I think I'm on Odyssey. I think I'm on Rumble. I think I'm like all over the place, but the main places I focus on is really Rockfin, because Rockfin gives back to creators. And I really appreciate that about Rockfin. And they also don't censor anything. And that is amazing in this age. So rockfin.com/rogueways is the place to go. I do love my communities that I've created. I've got the rogue.locals.com, and anyone can go there, and it's kind of like Facebook, but it also doesn't have censorship. And so we can actually share like anything we want and connect with each other there. And so that's a fun place to be. I have my Telegram group at t.me/rogueways. which is growing more and more all the time. And subscribestar.com/rogueways is another way to support me. But I really like the site, again, because it's a hub for all those things and for people to read some of my writing and see the other things that I do and just be connected to all of that stuff. So it's a good place. But I am on Twitter and I have almost no people there. So I like don't know how to tweet very well. I don't know what it is. I'm just like, this platform doesn't make sense to me, but here I am anyway. So it's kind of funny if you want to interact with me on Twitter and watch me not know what's going on, then that you can have a laugh. And then I'm constantly banned from Facebook, but I'm there too. So I mean, if you want to, you can try, but it's not going to be it'll be short-lived.
Are you on Float by any chance?
No, I need to be. I keep writing it down as a note every time someone mentions it, and then I keep not doing it, but it's a goal.
Yeah, Float's a great idea because it is basically, it even looks like Facebook. It's a great Facebook alternative. I'm assuming it's similar to Locals, which is sounds like a dating site, but it's actually, isn't it Dave Rubin's site? Did he?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
Dave.
like it because people can support Rogue Ways and be part of a community at the same time. So it's like a content creator version of Facebook.
Yeah. I had Dave on years ago when I think he was still
Oh,
working
wow.
at YT when he was on. Same thing with Jimmy Dore. I think when Jimmy Dore was on, he either just left TYT or maybe he was still there. But yeah, I remember when Dave was promoting Locals, I'm like, it sounds like a dating website. It does sound like, oh, I'm gonna meet some locals. So, but I get the point of it. But yeah, these alternatives, it's awesome that they're popping up, and it really is because of the censorship on all the main platforms that has opened a door for people to be intrigued with looking for alternatives. Float's cool because one, Aaron and Kingsley, the creators and the people who run it, are super awesome. They've been on a couple Union of the Unwanted shows. They've been on the Ripple Effect podcast before, and but they also teach you a way of getting basically all your content that's on Facebook. There's a way of downloading it to your computer. Everything, every post, every picture, every audio, everything you've ever posted on Facebook, there's a way of downloading it. I'm surprised that Facebook actually gives you this access, but I think it's because most people don't know how to do it. And download it, and then you can upload it onto your new Float account. And so basically you have a free archives of all your Facebook stuff. So if by any chance you ever get kicked off or something ever happens to your Facebook account, you'll have all that stuff on your Float account. So that's pretty cool. And really, have you ever looked into Matt? Well, do you know Matt from Content Safe?
No. Oh, yeah. I just had Matt on.
Oh, did you? Okay,
Yeah.
that's right. You did. Yeah. That's right. I remember listening to that. Because I was gonna say for content creator, he's another great guy to know in regards to just saving us a lot of uploading time by syncing all our channels together. So, but that's the beautiful thing about these things is that, to look at all the censorship in an optimistic way. It sucks to be censored on the major platforms, but these alternative platforms are growing, and hopefully some of them will be competing and maybe become a major platform because of the censorship. So I think if the censorship was mild, and if it was shadow banning and it wasn't so obvious, then maybe we would stick around on there. But because it's been so over the top, now we're like, you know what, fuck that platform, let me see what my other options are. So I think it really has helped some of these other platforms, which at least till now don't seem to be censoring people, or at least not to the extent that the major ones are. So yeah, definitely send me any link you would like in the show description. I'll put them all in there, and hopefully if we can get you for the next Union of the Unwanted, maybe a future one, we'll have you on, and we'll talk about some spirituality, because I know I wanted to touch on it, but again, like, you never know where these conversations
you can't fit everything in.
Yeah, you can't fit everything in.
Yeah. No, that would be great to come on. And I when you're talking about the decentralization of all of these platforms, and we're getting away from that because of the atrocities that we see on them, it's just reminded me of that same sort of topic we've been talking about, where we're going to see more and more of the atrocities with the education system. We're seeing more and more of the atrocities of centralized, federalized government concentration of power, and that's hopefully going to have the same effect, where it's just going to force people to be like, okay, fine, we're going to create this other situation. We don't need your help with it. We're just going to do it on our own, and everybody who wants to can come do this with us, and we're just going to make a parallel system, and then we don't have to put up with your control and your indoctrination and all these things. That same David and Goliath sort of effect can, I think, happen everywhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Lindsay, for your time. It was an awesome conversation. I'll definitely have you back on to talk about the 100 other things that I think we could discuss, and we'll keep in touch. I'll send you the links once it's up and live. Also.
Awesome. Thanks, Ricky. So nice to be here.
Hey, thank you.